Healthcare is changing, and Dr. Nancy RN is here for you. The topics are many, but each program stands on its own with 3 key action points for you to learn. Your guide to a healthier you in a changing world. Dr. Nancy RN.
Welcome to Dr. Nancy RN, Healthy World, Healthy Nation, Healthy You. I'm Nancy Valentine, PhD and registered nurse, and this show is dedicated to you, the healthcare consumer. And today we have a show on a topic that I'm sure many of you have been involved in personally, and that is being a family caregiver. Being a family caregiver is a very challenging role. And today we're going to be talking with an expert, both from a nursing and health science background, but also a person who's been very involved with family caregiving. So the topic of our show today, and the title of our show, is Tales of a Family Caregiver. Insights from the trenches as to when to laugh and when to cry, because obviously you're going to have all emotions involved. So our guest today, I'd love to welcome a national nursing expert, Dr. Gloria Donnelly. Let me tell you about Gloria as we welcome her to our show today. Gloria is a national nursing expert who is the Dean at the College of Nursing and Health Professions at Drexel University. She has been the Dean of Nursing of a number of other organizations, and she is very well known on corporate boards. She has written 4 textbooks. She is the editor of the Holistic Nursing Health Journal, so she is known in many, many circles. I have known her as a friend and colleague for many years here in Philadelphia. And what I really enjoy about her is that Gloria has a great sense of humor as well as a great mind. And so she really put those to work when she had to really take care of her own family. So let me give you her real bio. Her real bio is not just what she does professionally, but her real bio that really is pertinent to this show is her family caregiving. For 26 years, Dr. Gloria Donnelly, nurse, author, and dean of Drexel University, and her husband Joe, and they are about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. Yes. Congratulations. They cared for 3 aging parents. Each died peacefully at home at ages, her mother at 89, her mother-in-law at nearly 101, and her father recently at 103, nearly 104. Yes. So I would say that Gloria gets a blue ribbon, she and her husband, for family caregiving, because how many people live to those ages and die peacefully at home? It's a beautiful story. But I'm sure it had many challenges along the way, Gloria.
Yes, it did.
And so we're going to hear about those as she tells us about it. But I think before we get into her personal story and journey, which is very, very fascinating and interesting, the fact that you've done some research in this area about family caregiving in general, nationally. Yes. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, actually it is a huge, huge endeavor in the United States. I think sometimes people don't realize how many family caregivers they are, because many people just flow into it naturally. Others really do not have a choice, and still others really struggle with the whole idea of family caregiving. But in the United States, there are 44 million discrete family caregivers. There are 22 million households that have family members living with family who are responsible for their care. And people in this country who engage in family caregiving spend $300 billion a year out of pocket on these services and caregiving activities. The typical family caregiver is a 49-year-old woman who is caring most often for her mother, because women live longer, and who does this on an average in her lifetime 4.3 years.
Okay.
61% of all family caregivers are women. And AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, has done some interesting surveys of family caregivers. And it's interesting to note that women that are surveyed believe that they have less of a choice than men who are surveyed. Although 61% and 39% of caregivers are, the 39% are men, many of them report having a choice, feeling that they chose to do this, while 61% of the women, many of them felt it was a role foisted upon them. This is particularly true in families where there are multiple siblings. So in my case, in my husband's case, we are both only children.
I see.
So we, if we were going to do this, then there was really less of a negotiation among family members.
Right.
And that's a big issue with family caregiving. Who is going to assume responsibility once the parent has to move into somebody's home and cannot live on their own? I have many colleagues and many friends who are in that situation and who talk about the frustration of that, and sometimes feeling as if they are the only one in the family that's bearing the major part of the burden. That other siblings may come on Sunday for a visit and bring flowers, as one of my colleagues says, but that's really not enough. They don't understand the extent to which family caregiving envelops your life. It becomes a whole new way of life.
Right. So from this study and from your other research, not just the AARP study, but other research, do you think that women assume this more frequently because it is their mothers, or do you think there are other factors, sociological factors involved? I
think there are other factors involved. I think the fact that daughters care for mothers is a factor, although I haven't read a specific study about that. But I think that women in our society traditionally assume the role of nurturer, of caregiver. And so when it comes to this stage in life, they either naturally move into it, or their siblings who are male expect. And they assume the role either out of expectation or out of duty, or I'm sort of working with one colleague now who says, I have my mother because my mother lives closest to me. My siblings are all over the country. So I think location is a factor. And if your siblings are distributed all over the place, but you live 3 miles from your mother, you're most likely going to be the sibling that cares for her.
Right, so it could be multifactorial.
Yes.
But do you think it's so different today than it was historically? Don't you think that historically it's been like this?
Well, I think today there are so many more people who live to an advanced age.
That's true.
That it's a much bigger issue.
Right.
And so if we look at, what is the average retirement age now? I just had an interesting conversation with a labor economist at Drexel who tells me that the average age now that people are retiring is 72.
That's really interesting.
It's not 65. And so, and that people are living longer. And what is the science of aging saying now? That in 50 to 60 years, it may be possible for people to be living to 120. So
that means their caregivers are going to be quite elderly too.
Exactly. I mean, I am past 65, and so is my husband, and yet we've been caring for our parents, and we're, quote, considered or grouped with the elderly population in the United States. Now, we're both healthy and we're engaged and so forth, but I think the problem will compound itself over time.
Right. So, yes, and it sounds like the projections are pretty high.
Yes, they are. And of course, the other factor in terms of the research is level of burden. So when you look at definitions of family caregiving, it could be anywhere from, let's say, 4 hours a week where you're running errands and you're checking on people and you may have to take somebody shopping, to full in-home care, as my husband and I did later in the 26 years that we did this. When my mother-in-law moved in, she took care of herself. She was independent. She was in our home as a member of the family. But early on, there were really no direct, or I would even say as a nurse, clinical caregiving responsibilities. However, as she got older, more and more things happened. And then when my parents moved in '96, my mother was in the full blows of dementia, which is why they moved in. My father could not manage her anymore. And so then the problems became compounded.
Right. So in terms of the profile, did you fit the profile, or were you really extraordinary in that you could have a very responsible job and still be having these caregiving responsibilities at home? So tell us about that.
I kind of fit the profile.
So people keep their jobs.
They keep their jobs because the average woman, 49 years old, is working.
Right.
Most of them have some college education, and many of them are college educated. So I have a faculty member in the college who studies resilience among family caregivers in the African American community. And the profile there is a little different. They're not always out there working, but some of them are. But here, it's more of a way of life than a way of decision making. And they have, I think, what Beth's research shows, Dr. Gonzalez, is a very high level of resilience among family caregivers in this community. They do very well because it's their way of life. It's their ethos. I think there are some people upon whom family caregiving is foisted that really never anticipated living that way. And it may not have been in their value system or in their dream for how their life would be when they were older, and they have more difficulty with it.
But I think it's really important to listen to in this discussion is that with the growing statistics, whether you like it or not, you're going to be at least faced with this decision.
Yes.
It's not going to be something that you can dance around or escape because of all the demographics of people living longer. So even this discussion about differences in different cultural backgrounds, it would be very interesting to have a separate discussion on the African American community in terms of their resilience and ability to take this on maybe more with ease because of different sociological factors that are coming to bear with that community versus your average white community. So there are differences, but whether those differences are really critical, the critical point of this discussion right now is that we're all going to have to face this.
Yes, at one time or another. I mean, if now 20% of the population is actually doing it.
Right.
And the general health, the general demographics of the country is that the population is growing older, then in another 20, 30 years, it could be 40% of the population that's engaged in family caregiving.
With older and older caregivers.
Yes.
So we don't really know what the implications of that's going to be.
No.
You could really almost foresee having to have some kind of care delivery process that's taking care of multiple older generations in a family.
Right. And I think some other cultures, other countries, have done this much more effectively than we have. You know, there's a system in Great Britain of keeping people in their homes until very, very advanced ages with sort of community monitoring systems. I think that's done in Greece. So there are other countries that seem to have worked this out in much more effective, and I will call it familial ways than we have. You know, we here tend to think about institutionalization. Of course, you know, you either have to be have means, or you have to be poor and have nothing. It's the middle group that really struggles with, you know, could we afford a nursing home or a long-term care facility. And it's that middle group that I think struggles with the finances.
And that's the largest part of the group.
Exactly.
So the largest part of the group is really spending most of their time probably thinking about whether I should have long-term care insurance.
Exactly.
Rather than thinking it's an inevitable piece of this life cycle to really face this. How are we going to plan for this, whether we had long-term health insurance or we didn't have long-term health insurance?
That's right.
So tell us about your experience. How did this happen for you and your husband? You did mention earlier that you are only children, so there was no sibling squabbling
no
about
sibling squabbles about this. And so when my mother-in-law's brother died at age 80, my mother-in-law was 81, she ran a neighborhood bar, a tavern. And we used to tell her, you're the oldest living barmaid in Philadelphia, and I think she was.
How old was she then?
She was 81. And so she, after her brother died and they ran the business together, we convinced her that she really couldn't do this on her own. And she really did not want to move in with us. She did not want to be intrusive. And she used to say to me, and she was really my best friend, I don't want to be a burden. And I think if you read the literature, a lot of people who are going into the homes of their children will say that. They don't want to be a burden. They don't want to be perceived as a burden. And so we said to my mother-in-law, come with us and try it. And if you don't like living with us, we can either go and talk to your cousin who you might think you'd like to live with, or we can get you a small apartment someplace near where we live, and we will handle it that way. But come and try. Right. And she did, and she had run of the house. I mean, I was at work all day. My husband was when she first arrived, and then he retired. But she was lots of fun. She came on vacations with us. She was there when our two daughters were younger, and so we could slip out and go to a movie, and my mother-in-law would be there with the girls, and we wouldn't have to worry. And in the beginning, it really was not family caregiving from my perspective.
It was really more accommodating another person into your home.
And that's how I think it starts with many families. When my parents moved in 5 years later, it was really out of necessity. They lived in a little row house in South Philadelphia, and my mother was in I would call it the final throes of dementia. My father could not leave her alone in the house at all, so he became like a prisoner, and the decision was made. He made the decision to sell his house. And interestingly enough, he didn't ask me if he could move in. He called me one day and said, I sold the house, Glor, and we're moving in.
And you should have said, moving in where?
and he said, I just signed the papers. So that was it. 3 weeks later, after settlement, the truck pulled up. And of course now we are incorporating the third household into our house, and my mother and father moved in. Now my mother was very docile. She was very quiet. I would call her dementia a kind of depressed dementia, but my father was in very good shape and very good health. And my father was a, typical Italian male, and he was very bossy. And when he moved in, he was going to take over. And of course, my mother-in-law was already in the home. So what you have when you're dealing with incorporating parents into your home is a lot of role strain.
Right.
And the typical story was the day they moved in, the movers were unloading. It was a small truck. And my mother's prized possession was a pole lamp from the 50s that had these two huge quilted glass globes perched on top of these cherubs or putti that were all sprayed with white and gold. And my father walked into my living room that's all dark wood and very sedate looking and calming, and he's standing in the middle of my living room with the pole lamp, and he says, "Where shall we put it?" And I said, I don't think this is the room. What do you mean? It's got all this dark wood. You need something in here to brighten it up. I don't think so, Dad. I don't think it's going to reach these are 9-foot ceilings, Dad. I don't think he said, "We'll get an extension." I said, "We won't." And so that sort of became the metaphor, because you know what your relationship is like with your parents or whomever you're incorporating into your home before they come in becomes exaggerated in some way after they're living with you again.
Right.
So I knew down the line that my father and I primarily would clash. My mother and I never did, and of course she was in her final throes of dementia and really was not any kind of a problem at all in terms of negotiation or agitation or any of that.
Right.
But my father, who had, had all his mentation, he was going to now rule the roost, particularly clashed with my mother-in-law. The first night they were with us, he told my mother-in-law to go to bed. It was 11 o'clock. And she said, "I beg your pardon." I was in the hallway and I thought, I'm not going in there. I'm going to let her handle it. And I heard him say, "Helen, it's 11 o'clock. It's time for bed." And she said, "Tom, I watch the news every night." "Well," he said, "I have to lock up."
Right.
And she said, "Let's get one thing straight. I watch the news. You could lock up now. I'll turn the TV off. But you don't tell me what time to go to bed." That was the last time he did it. And those are the kinds of negotiations you experience when you have your parents in your home.
But I think that Gloria's story is not only amazing, and it's very humorous in retrospect. I'm sure at the time it was very challenging, because it's one thing to negotiate having one parent come, or if both of your parents come together. It's another to have your in-laws and your parents together, as you're pointing out.
Yes.
And it sounds like there wasn't a lot of negotiation initially, because people were in reasonably good shape. And your mother, even though she had the dementia, she was able to be stabilized in the home. And familiarity is very important. So she was familiar, and she sort of fit in a way that was not is very disruptive.
Right.
But you bring up a good point. And so part of our show is to really give tips. And from just that part of the story alone, what did you learn from that? I mean, how would you counsel other people that are listening?
Well, I would tell other people to really, when you're in that situation, if you're in a situation where you're going to have a choice, then you really have to think about how you're going to accommodate. How are you going to extend your relationship so that the family caregiving works out? How are you going to frame it? Are you realistic about it? Or do you think everything is going to work out beautifully just because you're doing this? And it doesn't. You have to expect that there will be ups and downs with family caregiving, and that your previous relationship with your parent or your mother-in-law or whomever you're incorporating into your home is going to color the development of the relationship over time for as long as they're with you. I have to say that I've spoken to many people who are doing this very reluctantly. And it certainly wears on them a lot, I would say, heavier than it ever wore on me. Now, I have my husband to support support me and I support him because it was his mother and my parents. So it was kind of equal. We would divide the duties.
Right.
So when my father, at the end, and with my mother, when at nighttime, bedtime, we didn't have a full-time caregiver until I would say the last 3 years. But before that, we would kind of divide the bedtime duties, making certain my father got up the stairs okay, making certain my mother-in-law got into bed okay because she was having ambulatory problems by then. So we would divide that up. My husband would handle some of the meals during the week. I would handle them on the weekend, and we kind of had a rhythm to how we were dividing the work. I think many women who get into this feel very burdened because they don't ask for help.
Right, and I think that's really an important point. I mean, obviously it goes without saying that the relationship that Gloria has with her husband has to be a remarkably positive one for he to chip in and for she to know how to help ask him to do that, so that they did have the sharing of burden. But what I hear is that she's going back to almost what it's like to raise children. In fact,
Yes.
Dr. Donnelly told me as we were preparing for this, that she and her husband took care of their aging parents longer than it took them to raise and launch two daughters.
That's exactly right.
And I think that this is in for the long haul in this case, even though statistically, she told us earlier in the show that the average caretaking responsibilities for parents tend to be less than 5 years. But if you're doing such a great job, it can go on and on. Like I said to Gloria, in chatting with her, I said, people can love their mother-in-law, but they don't necessarily love them for 101 years. Right. In her case, she said it was her best friend, so she was very blessed, and they were both blessed to have that relationship. But I think that in terms of what people need to negotiate, we've already heard that the relationships are the same on one hand, because after all, you know your parents, you know your in-laws in this case, for this example, or maybe other people, sisters, brothers that may be coming to live with you, aunts or uncles, depending on the situation. But the relationship does change, because the whole relationship of who's in charge of what, how things get negotiated, really have to be out on the table. You have to talk about it.
Right, and it's reverse.
It is, it's the reverse, exactly. So I think that what we've done today in this show is that we've really just started a conversation that can really go on for many different chapters. And we may do that because Dr. Donnelly is thinking of writing a book on this topic, because she has learned so much from her experience. And with her background as a nurse and as a scientist and as a healthcare administrator, she has, I think, a great opportunity to share these with people at large. So what we've done in this show today is we've covered how frequently this happens to people and how it's really a growing trend. We've talked about how you have to renegotiate those relationships, and I think the example with the floor lamp is priceless in terms of that was a symbol of how things had to change. And then I think we've just touched on the whole concept of respite care and needing a break. Just the fact that you have to ask for help, and at times you're going to have to take your own break. This has been a fascinating warm-up session, Dr. Donnelly, and we only have about 30 seconds left. So why don't you tell us, if you really were to have it to do over again, would you do it over again?
I would do it over again, and I think I would do it the same way. And one last point I'd like to make to anyone out there who is a family caregiver: find somebody to talk to about your experiences. I've worked with many nurses, with many colleagues who keep their frustrations to themselves, who keep it a secret.
Right.
And that is not the way to go. These are life experiences. You have to share them. You have to talk about them. You have to process them in your own way, and you have to get them out there, because you are not alone.
Right. That's really great advice. As you know, one of the goals of our show is to help you navigate the healthcare system. Sometimes the healthcare system's right in your own living room. And that's what we've really started to talk about today, how you can be an effective caregiver and not burn out doing it. So we're going to have more on this topic, but we just wanted to introduce Dr. Donnelly to you because you're going to see her again. And she's a sparkling person that really can spend some time with us, educating us from the grassroots. She was in the trenches. She knew when to laugh and she knew when to cry. And she has really learned a lot that she can share with us. Thank you very much, Dr. Donnelly, for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today and that the information will help you in meeting your health goals. Catch this program and other conversations on the website, drnancyrn.com. Or you can write to me as well. I welcome your comments and feedback. Thank you for listening and join us again. And remember, with health, all things are possible.